I was born expensive. That's what my father, Martin Hale, liked to remind me. Congenital heart defect, 2 surgeries before I turned 5, months in pediatric intensive care. Insurance didn't cover everything. My mother whispered about bills at night. My father never whispered. "You cost us more than the house," he'd say. My older sister, Erin Hale, never heard that sentence. Her tuition was called an investment. Mine was another risk. The only person who never treated me like a liability was my grandfather, Arthur Hale. He used to sit beside my hospital bed and tell me, "You're not a debt, you're a heartbeat." When he died, he left his house and his savings to me, quietly, privately, through his attorney. My father didn't find out until after the will was read. He didn't argue then. He just smiled in a way I didn't understand. 3 months later, I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up briefly to voices. One of them was my father's. "How much will the surgery cost?" he asked. A pause. Then, "Let her go. We're not paying for that." I slipped back into the dark before I could open my eyes. But someone else heard him too, and that changed everything. My name is Luna Hale. I didn't hear everything that happened in that room. I learned it later, from chart notes, from staff who hesitated before speaking, from a nurse who still looked angry when she remembered. After the crash, I was unconscious, but technically alive. Internal bleeding, high risk. The trauma surgeon recommended immediate surgery. My father was listed as next of kin. When the estimate was discussed, he asked twice if there were conservative options. There weren't. That's when he approved the DNR. Not because my condition was hopeless, because it was expensive. He signed the form calmly, no shouting, no visible emotion, just a practical decision, as if declining an extended warranty. But what he didn't know, what he forgot, was that years earlier, after one of my cardiac scare-ups, I had filed a healthcare proxy. I named my best friend, Sophia Bennett, as my medical decision-maker. It was buried in my records, and a nurse, someone I'd worked beside for 2 years, thought to check. Sophia was called. She arrived before the DNR could be fully implemented. She overrode it, authorized surgery, and stayed beside my bed while machines did the work my father had declined to fund. He left the hospital that night, believing nature would handle what he had chosen not to fund. He didn't expect paperwork to intervene. He didn't expect me to survive. And he definitely didn't expect what he would do next. While I was unconscious, my father didn't wait. He told extended family my condition was critical but unclear. He handled updates himself, controlled the flow of information. No one questioned it. He was the father. He was the deacon. He sounded steady. Behind that steadiness, he arranged documents. He produced a power of attorney bearing my signature. It wasn't mine. The date was recent, too recent, signed while I was already sedated and intubated. With that document, he transferred my grandfather's house into his own name. No announcement, no family discussion, just paperwork filed at the county office. 3 days later, he secured a $315,000 loan against the property. The funds weren't directed towards my surgery. They were wired into accounts that had been hemorrhaging for months. Debts he'd been hiding, high-stakes betting, private lenders, pressure he never admitted publicly. My sister, Erin, saw the loan confirmation email. She didn't challenge it. She accepted his explanation that it was a restructuring and that I would understand later. Meanwhile, I was on a ventilator, and while surgeons repaired what the accident had torn apart, my father was liquidating the only asset that had ever been truly mine. He visited once. He stood near the door, didn't touch me. "If she survives," he said quietly, to no one in particular, "we'll sort the rest out." When I woke up days later, the room was bright. Sophia was there. I didn't ask about my injuries. I asked, "Did he try to stop the surgery?" She nodded. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't confront him in the hospital. That would have made it emotional, defensive, easy for him to deny. Instead, I asked for copies. My chart, the DNR, the timestamp, the signature. Hospitals document everything. He'd forgotten that. The DNR had been signed at 9:14 p.m. Sophia's override was logged at 9:32 p.m. 18 minutes. That was the window between my father choosing not to save me and someone else choosing differently. I also asked the county clerk for the deed history on my grandfather's house, public record. The transfer was filed while I was still listed as unconscious and intubated in the hospital system. Same week, same dates. The power of attorney attached to the filing carried my name in a version I hadn't used since high school. He'd practiced it. That detail settled something inside me. This wasn't panic, it was preparation. I contacted my grandfather's attorney, Mr. Charles Kessler. He still had the original will on file. He didn't ask many questions when I explained. He just said, "Email me the documents. Do not speak to your father yet." Within hours, he called back. The deed transfer was legally voidable. The power of attorney was fraudulent. The mortgage could be frozen, but only if we moved immediately. I didn't feel rage. I felt precise. I told Mr. Kessler to file everything, and then I asked him one more thing. Can we notify the church board before my father does? My father had been a deacon at Cedar Grove Community Church for 15 years. He handled charity funds, sat on advisory boards, prayed over families who were drowning in medical debt. That part almost impressed me. Almost. Mr. Kessler moved fast. An emergency petition was filed to freeze the mortgage and halt any further transfer of the property. The county clerk flagged the deed pending investigation. The lender was formally notified that the power of attorney was under dispute. None of it was loud, but it was immediate. Within 24 hours, my father received notice that the property transfer was being challenged for fraud. He called me that evening, not to ask how I was healing, to ask why lawyers were involved. "You could have talked to me first," he said. I let the silence sit long enough to make the point. "You signed a DNR," I replied evenly. "You transferred my house while I was unconscious. It was temporary," he snapped. "You owe this family." There it was, the ledger again, the childhood debt, the surgery, the cost. "I don't owe you my life," I said. He didn't respond to that. The church board did. They received a copy of the filed petition the next morning. Fraud, forgery, contested mortgage. Documentation travels quickly when reputation is attached. By Sunday, he wasn't leading service. He was answering questions. And for the first time in my life, he didn't control the room. I went to church that Sunday, not to make a scene, to sit in the third row and listen. People stared when I walked in. Word had already moved through the congregation, not rumors this time, but documents, legal language printed and highlighted, dates, signatures, filing numbers. My father stood near the front, speaking in low tones with two board members. He looked composed, he always did, until he saw me. The service felt shorter than usual, or maybe I was just paying closer attention. When it ended, one of the elders asked my father to remain behind. I didn't approach him. Mr. Kessler did. He handed the board a clean folder. Inside were copies of the contested deed transfer, the forged power of attorney, the hospital record of the DNR, and Sophia's healthcare proxy authorization. No accusations, no speeches, just paper. My sister, Erin, stood near the hallway. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Later, she would admit she knew about the house transfer. She said it was temporary. She said she didn't want to get involved. Silence is a choice. The board asked my father if the signature on the power of attorney was mine. He hesitated. That was enough. They didn't remove him publicly that day. They suspended him pending investigation. Reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It thins out. By Monday morning, the lender froze the mortgage. By Tuesday, the district attorney's office had opened a fraud inquiry. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. For years, he told me I was a financial burden. Within a week, he became a liability. And this time, the numbers were written in ink. The investigation moved slower than the headlines in my head, but faster than my father expected. Forensic handwriting analysis confirmed the signature wasn't mine. The notary admitted he hadn't witnessed me sign anything. The timeline from the hospital made the rest obvious. When charges were formally filed, fraud, forgery, unlawful transfer of property, my father didn't deny the documents. He denied the intent. He said he was protecting the asset. He said he was handling family debt. He said I was too sick to understand what needed to be done. The same language he'd used my entire life. Protection, sacrifice, responsibility, just rearranged. My sister, Erin, was questioned too. She admitted she knew about the mortgage. She said she assumed I'd repay Dad eventually. That word again, repay. She avoided criminal exposure by cooperating. I didn't argue for harsher consequences. I just let the truth sit where it was placed. My father eventually entered a plea agreement. He sold his own house to begin restitution. The mortgage on my grandfather's home was voided completely. The deed was restored to my name. There were no dramatic apologies, no emotional speeches, just legal documents closing what he had tried to open. When I was cleared to return to work, I moved into my grandfather's house. I stood in the doorway alone for a long time, not grieving, not celebrating, just understanding something clearly for the first time. Family loyalty does not mean self-erasure, and boundaries aren't revenge, they are survival. The church never made a public spectacle of it. They released a short statement about leadership transition and ongoing legal matters. Polite language, controlled. But people knew. They always know. I didn't attend the hearing where my father finalized his plea. I read the transcript later. He acknowledged signing documents he wasn't authorized to sign. He acknowledged transferring property that wasn't his. He never mentioned the DNR. That silence was deliberate. The medical board conducted its own review of the hospital incident. They confirmed that Sophia's healthcare proxy overrode his authority. The DNR was marked invalid. It remained in my chart as a record, not of my medical condition, but of his choice. That mattered to me more than any sentence handed down in court. My sister sent me one message after everything was settled. I didn't think he'd go that far. I stared at it for a long time. He had been going that far my entire life. It just took paperwork for it to become visible. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because some conversations end without closure. I focused on physical therapy, on rebuilding stamina, on returning to the hospital where I worked, this time with a scar down my abdomen and a clarity I didn't have before. When patients asked about my recovery, I kept it simple. Complicated, I'd say. Healing always is, but surviving something doesn't make you grateful for it. It just makes you precise about what you will never allow again. Moving into my grandfather's house didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. He had left it to me quietly, without ceremony, because he understood something my father never did. Love isn't a transaction. The first night I slept there, the house was almost too quiet. No hospital monitors, no legal calls, no tension humming under every conversation. Just silence. I walked through each room slowly. The hardwood floors he'd refinished himself, the desk where he used to balance his checkbook by hand, the kitchen table where he'd tell me, "You don't owe anyone for being alive." For years, I thought he was just comforting me. Now I understood he was correcting something. My father's restitution payments were court-ordered, structured, monitored. He wasn't allowed to hold fiduciary positions anymore. No more church oversight. No more financial stewardship roles. Consequences weren't explosive. They were administrative. And somehow that felt heavier. At work, I returned to the cardiac floor. The first time I signed a consent form for a patient's emergency procedure, my hands didn't shake. I read every line carefully. I always had, but now I read them differently. Authority should never go unchecked. Not in families, not in hospitals, not anywhere. My name was back on the deed, back on my medical badge, back in control of my own decisions, and that was enough. My father tried to see me once after sentencing, not at the house, not at the hospital. He waited outside the courthouse the day final restitution terms were signed. He looked older, smaller, not defeated, just reduced. "I made mistakes," he said. That was the closest he would ever come to an apology. I studied his face carefully, the way I study lab results, looking for clarity, not emotion. "You tried to let me die," I said quietly. Not accusing, just factual. He flinched. "It wasn't like that." It was exactly like that. He started to say something about money, about pressure, about stress. I held up my hand. "For years, you told me I owed you for surviving. I made my heartbeat sound like a debt." He didn't deny that either. I didn't ask him to admit more. I didn't need him to understand fully. I just needed him to know that I did. "I'm not your liability," I told him, "and I'm not your investment." Then I left. No yelling, no tears. The house remains mine. My medical decisions remain mine. My life remains mine. He lost control, not because I destroyed him, but because I finally stopped carrying the bill he assigned to my existence, and once I did that, there was nothing left for him to collect. If this story meant something to you, even quietly, take a second to like it and subscribe.